Welcome to the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. Week 3 is almost here. We're talking about the trade targets that we want to buy before week 3. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. Dave, last week we did a decent job, I think, going out here. Like, I'm looking at the names we were talking about last week to buy before week 2. You talked about Mark Andrews. He ended up being a tight end 1 in week 2. You talked about Amon St. Brown, which, by the way, we were told that we pronounce his name incorrectly. So it's either Amon-Ra, or Amun-Ra, which I have also heard as well.
I think the joke from that YouTube commenter was that it's Sun God is how you say his name.
Was that really the joke? That was a poor joke.
I think that was the joke. I could be wrong, but that was my
He just said, you guys are saying his name weird. Why do you sound like that? Anyways, let's not get off track here 30 seconds into the pod. But yeah, Mark Andrews, he was tight end 1 in week 2. Chris Olave, who it still hasn't quite happened, but I'll tell everybody, like, stay strong with that one. 38% target share in week 2, and that Saints offense is really good. Zay Flowers, he was a wide receiver 1 in week 2. St. Brown, I'm not even going to say the name now because now I'm paranoid. Wide receiver 1 in week 2. And then Drake London, he was a top 18 wide receiver in week 2 as well. So these were all players that bounced back in the right way. And if you did take advantage of people panicking after week 1, good on you. You were able to make your team a little bit better. For week 3 here, we are going to jump into our trade targets. And Dave, you and I each came up with 3 different players. And we're thinking that we'd like to have similar results going into this week. Players that we either see that
nice.
A, there is a buy low opportunity, or B, the schedule is about to ease up for them a lot. So, Dave, why don't you kick us off here? Your first guy is Jaylen Waddle.
And I know this one's going to raise some eyebrows because everybody's going to say, wait. He's been really disappointing this season. And they just lost Tua Tagovailoa. Why would I possibly buy Jaylen Waddle? But because of those reasons, you can get him for so cheap right now. I was looking at consensus rest of season rankings just yesterday, and I couldn't believe where I was seeing him outside of the top 60 in consensus rest of season rankings. And this is a guy who is leading all wide receivers in catch rate over expectation. He's currently 14th in the league in yards per route run. He's a very good player. We know this. If you can get him for any sort of dip in price now without Tua Tagovailoa being there in Miami, I think you should take advantage of it. And this isn't a guy I expected to be talking about today, but like I said, I was looking at consensus rest of season rankings, trying to get my gears spinning a little bit. And I see Jaylen Waddle in the same area as Rashid Shaheed, Terry McLaurin, Stephon Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Najee Harris, Zach Moss, all guys who are, overperforming so far this season, while Jaylen Waddle is underperforming. If I could flip any of those guys, let me read this list to you again. Rashid Shaheed, Stephon Diggs, Terry McLaurin, Xavier Worthy, Najee Harris, Zach Moss. I would trade any of those guys for Jaylen Waddle in a heartbeat.
I almost threw up when you said Zach Moss. I just want to let you know.
Is that one of the guys that you're talking about today? Did I do the thing?
No.
I'm looking at the guys you're talking about, and I didn't talk about any of them. So we're good. Yeah, I'm not
I
bad
know.
your guys today.
I'm just saying, in general, the fact that Jaylen Waddle's value is anywhere near a guy like Zach Moss makes me want to throw up.
And like Rashid Shaheed has been great in this offense. Don't get me wrong. And he's scoring touchdowns, and we like to see the usage, but we have 3 years of data telling us that Jaylen Waddle is an elite NFL wide receiver. We have 2 weeks telling us that Rashid Shaheed is overperforming expectations. These are the exact types of trades you should be trying to make right now. As I've talked about, a few times already this season, and as we've talked about in years past, Adam Harstad's done a study that shows that through the first month of the NFL season, weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4, preseason ADP is going to be more predictive of future production than any other metric out there. So people start getting super concerned, and you look at, who's scoring and who isn't scoring. And this is when people make trades that can make or break their season. And if you're able to trade a guy like Rashid Shaheed that you got in the 10th round, 12th round of your draft, and you could flip him for Jaylen Waddle, a proven stud wide receiver, yeah, I'm not even thinking twice about that.
Yeah, I think that, we already know Jaylen Waddle's a great player. And like you said, I think it's going to be tough for people to overcome the mental gymnastics of saying Tua's not there. How can I even trade for Jaylen Waddle? But sometimes, especially if the price, and that's the whole caveat here, if the price is right and you can get him for really low, I don't think it's crazy to still think that Jaylen Waddle's a wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team, regardless of who the quarterback is. So if you're able to get him for that kind of price, or even less than that, because the Jaylen Waddle manager is just freaking out, then yeah, go for it by all means.
And I also think that in Miami, without Tua there, we're going to see a little bit of a different offense. And Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle both have great yards after the catch ability. We might not see Skylar Thompson ripping the ball 40, 50 yards downfield the way that Tua did, but they're going to be doing whatever they can to get their ball in the playmaker's hands. So we've already seen what this offense looks like. Their passing game is going to revolve around Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, and Devon Achane. And I think we're still going to see the same thing, but rather than pulling those targets on average 10, 12, 15 yards downfield, they're probably going to be getting more high percentage throws, 3 to 5 yards off the line of scrimmage and letting them make plays after the catch. And that's where Jaylen Waddle really excels. So, of course, I'm knocking him down a little bit without Tua Tagovailoa being there, but not to the point that other people are knocking him down where he's outside of the top 60 overall players. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah, I'm not quite ready to bet on this Dolphins offense not being able to score as long as Mike McDaniel is still the coach there, and they still have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane. This team is going to be one play away from a score all the time. They're always in scoring range.
That's the thing. Like
Uh,
all we've heard is that like Tua Tagovailoa is not a good quarterback over the last 4 years, right? That he's just a
and now we're
product of the
freaking out.
system. So now all of a sudden that we lose Tua Tagovailoa, everybody's freaking out. Like Skylar Thompson just needs to be a game manager. Like he just needs to run this offense and get the ball in his playmaker's hands. And I have faith in him to be able to do that.
Yeah, and the Dolphins they just signed Tyler Huntley as well, Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Huntley.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
just just saying
I
anything
believe
can
that was
happen.
the year after Mitch Trubisky made the Pro Bowl. Yeah, some really lofty expectations there for these Pro Bowlers.
Some might say we are the Pro Bowl of podcasts for fantasy football. So, yeah, I'll take that. If you're watching here on YouTube, I just want to let you guys know you got a ton of ways that you can enjoy the show. One on YouTube, and the other one is going to be on the audio version on Apple or Spotify. If you're watching here, please take a moment to like this video, comment down below with maybe some trade questions that you have, and we'll do our best to get back to each of those. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We've got 4 episodes per week coming out on this channel, and the Sunday morning live start sit advice for you guys with Joey Wright, Jacker May, Jeff Bell, Adam Hutchison, our injury expert, and so many other football guys, staffers there. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, when you're done with this, please just take a second, leave us a quick review. 5 stars is preferred. It is such a huge help for us. It absolutely boosts our show, and it makes sure that Dave and I don't get fired, which I mean would be ideal considering the holidays are coming up. So if you support people losing their job at the holidays, don't leave a review.
Yeah.
That's my
Cooper
advice.
Kupp was my guy at the wide receiver position, and I just got an email from Joe Bryant this morning. If we don't get 5 reviews on the podcast today, I'm done because of that Cooper Kupp call. So please help me keep my job.
So leave exactly 4 of you guys. All right, let's go on to our next one here. I'm talking about Jamar Chase, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, and it kind of sounds crazy that we'd even talk about Jamar Chase as a buy low candidate, considering we are 2 weeks removed from everyone drafting him in the first round of their fantasy football drafts. And I know there was like some weird stuff going on with the contract, and there's probably some people out there that still just believe he's not trying hard because he doesn't have the contract that he wants. And when T. Higgins comes back, it's all just gonna blow up, and the Bengals are done. And guys, we cannot overreact to the first week of football, which we said not to with the Bengals, of course. The Bengals are notoriously slow starters. And then the second week, they go up against the Kansas City Chiefs, the same defense that was able to essentially shut down Mark Andrews and the Ravens. This has been a tough matchup after tough matchup for Jamar Chase and the Bengals right now. 10 receptions, 97 yards on the season. That's normally what Jamar Chase could get in a game, no problem. The thing that really stands out to me right now is 16% target share. He's 109th amongst qualifying pass catchers. So wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. That is awful. I think that goes without saying. He's wide receiver 42 in fantasy football right now. And Jamar Chase has never finished lower than wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game. Right now, he's at wide receiver 42. If there wasn't a more, I don't think there is a more obvious buy low in fantasy football right now than Jamar Chase. The schedule gets so much easier for him and the Bengals this upcoming week. They're going to have the Washington Commanders, who have given up the most points allowed to wide receivers. And the following week, they've got the Carolina Panthers, who just let Quentin Johnston score twice, and he became everyone's waiver wire darling that they're dropping 30% of their fab on. So I would like to think Jamar Chase can score and catch passes on the worst secondary in the league and go and catch a touchdown against the team that let Quentin Johnston do it twice.
Yeah.
And
And I mean,
this Bengals offense should improve. Keep going, Dave.
I was just going to say, this was the last year, we don't want to put too much into strength of schedule, right? Because things change year over year. But last year we were targeting this Washington defense every single week, saying start your wide receivers against the Washington defense. And last year, they allowed the second most points to opposing wide receivers. They gave up 43 points per game. And to start this season, they're not only picking up where they left off last year, but they've actually gotten worse. They're averaging 52 points per game given up to opposing wide receivers. And yeah, I mean, we just saw Malik Neighbors absolutely torch this defense. We saw Mike Evans and Chris Godwin torch the defense in week one. And this is just, the definition of a get right game. We talked about this with the Bears last year. Remember when the Bears got off to a slow start and we said, well, they've got that. I forget if it was week 4 or week 5. We said we got that matchup coming up against Washington, and that can be a get right game for them. And then DJ Moore goes for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Justin Fields is the passing game of his career. This is the get right game for the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think a lot of people who are very plugged into fantasy football and are watching podcasts and digging through the data see this week 3 matchup against Washington and say, well, that's the get right game. That's going to be the boom game. But you're not as plugged in. People are going to see the production in the first 2 weeks, and they're going to see the usage, and they're starting to panic a little bit. This is probably your last chance to buy Jamar Chase.
Yeah. This right now, weeks 1 through 3, Dave, I'd say would be those weeks where your waiver wire ads and your trades end up having the biggest impact on your season. And if you're able to go and grab a guy like this who was a round 1 pick for, let's say, a round 3 cost, I'm not sure how to value that through a trade. It's got to be seen as an absolute win going forward, unless just something totally unforeseen happens. I'm not too worried about T. Higgins coming back. We've seen Jamar Chase produce year after year, even with T. Higgins on the field. And right now, the running game's it's not even going. It's non-existent. Zach Moss has been cheeks, just terrible. He's the left and right cheek right now. And the team can't run the ball. They're going to keep going back to Jamar Chase. And honestly, as seeing the interviews after that game versus Kansas City, the Bengals are pissed. Bengals players are pissed. And I hate to do the whole intangible thing and they're going to come out angry, but they are. They are, and I would not be surprised if they go out and drop a 40 burger on the Commanders. Just saying.
Yeah. So this is an easy one for me. I'm with you. I know this is a trade target show, but I did my first run of week 3 rankings last night. Jamar Chase comes in as my wide receiver 1 for week 3. And I know that's going to be crazy to a lot of people because of the lack of production so far. But, CeeDee Lamb has a tough matchup. Amon St. Brown is now ceding some of his opportunities to JMO. I know he saw 19 targets last week, but he is not going to be pulling that 35% target share every single week. Justin Jefferson, he's been good with Sam Darnold, but not the same player. I mean, it's just the way my rankings worked out. Jamar Chase with this matchup, he is my wide receiver 1 in primetime on Monday night.
All right, let's go to your next trade target here. You want to talk about David Montgomery, running back for the Detroit Lions. And honestly, I think there's a case to be made that both Lions running backs are by lows at this point because this
Yep.
Lions offense just doesn't even seem like they don't have their foot all the way on the gas right now. And it just feels like every single player can get better, except for maybe Jameson Williams. That seems like we've reached the mountaintop there.
Yeah, and with David Montgomery, I think a lot of people expected a split, but based on ADP, I think a lot of people expected this split to be heavily in favor of Jahmyr Gibbs, and that just isn't the case right now. David Montgomery is out touching Jahmyr Gibbs on the ground, 28-24. Gibbs has a 13-5 lead in targets. Gibbs has run some more routes, but they're splitting goal line work as well inside the 5. 2 touches to Gibbs, 2 touches to Montgomery. So we know that Gibbs has a higher ceiling because he is going to get a little bit more work in the pass game, but David Montgomery has still been plenty involved as a rusher, and he's still getting the looks in the red zone that we want to see. And really what it comes down to is that David Montgomery is just looking like a completely different runner now in Detroit than he did during his stint in Chicago. He has just been an efficiency monster. And so far this year, he's 3rd in the league in rushing EPA behind only J.K. Dobbins and Alvin Kamara. He's 2nd in the league in success rate per next gen stats. And what it comes down to is this is just like the perfect type of running back to have. And this is such a rare commodity in fantasy football. We always talk about the guys that have standalone value and contingent upside. And we always talk about, this guy might have that in regards to like a Zach Charbonnet who has no standalone value, or, there's, you get what I'm saying. There's a lot of guys that we always say this about, but David Montgomery is one of the few guys that actually does have standalone RB2 value. And if Jahmyr Gibbs misses any games, then all of a sudden we're looking at elite RB1 upside. So again, looking through rest of season ranks, I was shocked to see how low David Montgomery is. And right now, he's in the same group as Ramondre Stevenson and Jordan Mason. And Jordan Mason, I mean, this might just be another 4 weeks of Jordan Mason before he's back on the bench watching Christian McCaffrey. Ramondre Stevenson has been very good so far, and he does have a workhorse role, but I'd rather have a running back on the Lions than a running back on the Patriots. Looking across positions, there's some other guys, Drake London, Zay Flowers, who are valued similarly to David Montgomery. And I just see that as a great value. If I can get David Montgomery, a guy who is going to be giving you consistent RB2 production week in and week out, and is going to have a handful of RB1 games in there, also has the contingent upside in the event of an injury to Jahmyr Gibbs. That's just these types of players are so rare in fantasy football. I want to try to get David Montgomery on my team if I can.
And you know who's really like feeling it right now? It's the people who sort of did the modified zero RB approach where they got to wait until like the sixth round and or fifth round and get David Montgomery there. Those people are really happy. And it makes me wonder, is that because of where you drafted David Montgomery, you're probably already pretty happy with him. How do you make that trade happen? Like how do you make that trade happen with that manager? Because it's not one of those where like he was drafted early and he's been so bad they're like, I just want to get rid of him. How would you approach that, Dave?
I think you try to look from a position of need. If you have a surplus of wide receivers and you see the David Montgomery manager has another two running backs on his team, he's using one of these guys in the flex spot, or maybe has a guy like Ramondre Stevenson or J.K. Dobbins, somebody who has really overperformed expectations on the bench. That's when you might be willing to throw out a Drake London or Zay Flowers or T. Higgins or one of these wide receiver twos, and you can help fill a position in need on your team if you're weak at running back to bring in a guy like Montgomery.
There you go. From a very smart man. All right, I'm gonna
Ooh,
go to my next guy. Oh yeah, there was someone else that was here. You not you. No. I'm gonna go to my next guy on here, and I've been such a proud papa this year watching Jameson Williams play well. And I'm not actually his father. I'm just like, I've just been the Jameson Williams stan, touting him for so long. And the other guy that I've been waiting for it. And it's kind of happening. It's kind of there. George Pickens, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you kind of look around right now, almost every article or trade, you know, graphic or whatever is saying go after George Pickens. And it's true. And it has nothing to do with even like the numbers. You can dive into the numbers, but just watching the games, George Pickens has been phenomenal. And right now, I think there's going to be the manager who, like we said earlier, Dave, the person who's not watching all the games, the person who's not diving into the stats, the person who's not active in their fantasy league, they're just looking at George Pickens, who finished as the wide receiver 63 last week. And they're
mhm.
saying, oh my God, get this guy off my roster. It's the same thing last year with Drake London and Arthur Smith. It's the same crappy Pittsburgh Steelers offense that we've always had. I can't believe I did this again. Get him off my roster. That's the type of fantasy manager that you want to go and start the trade talks with, because there's so much that we missed from this game. So there were three specific plays, Dave, from a touchdown that was called back, a long reception that was called back, and then a defensive pass interference. Those three plays, nothing else that George Pickens did. Those three plays by themselves would have accounted for the wide receiver 17 last week in terms of points.
Mhm.
If you add that into what George Pickens actually got credited with, he would have been the wide receiver 9 last week. And this would be a totally different conversation. Now, we can, like, maybe if and all that, we can do that with every single player. But what we're actually seeing is a player who's just, this is, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it's just been very odd. He's had over 150 yards, receiving yards called back on penalties, and a touchdown called back on penalties. This is a guy who the ranking, the points per game right now in fantasy do not represent what he's doing on the field. He's constantly getting open. Justin Fields is always looking for him. He's got a 32% first read target share, which is phenomenal. Dave, and I mean, you got to experience this last year. I think George Pickens is getting the DJ Moore treatment that Justin
That's
Fields gave him
exactly what I was
last year.
about to say. Yep, yep,
And
very similar
DJ
players.
Moore, Yeah, DJ Moore was the wide receiver 7 overall. These are both very explosive players that can win downfield, they can win across the field. There's an easier schedule coming up for George Pickens and the Steelers going forward. I think this is another very easy buy low candidate for me.
Yeah, this is mind blowing right here. Air yard share is the percentage of air yards. Air yards being how far the football travels to get into a player's hands. George Pickens is currently leading the NFL. He is 77.3% of the team's air yards. That is bonkers. Like, normally we're targeting guys like, wow, this guy's got a 35% air yard share. We really want to get this guy. 77.3% for George Pickens. And you hit it on the head. This is the type of player that Justin Fields likes. He likes throwing these balls to these guys who are good at contested catches, guys that can make plays after the catch. And I think that they're just going to continue to force feed the ball to George Pickens.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really have much else going on. We knew this going into the season. There's not much else in the wide receiver room. We're not seeing the usage that I think we wanted or we thought we'd get with Pat Fryermuth at the tight end spot. I mean, we saw a Darnell Washington touchdown here. The running backs have been fine, but really, this is a George Pickens offense, and all those like analysts and former players that were talking about how George Pickens is elite, top 10 guy in the league, and everyone kind of laughed at that over the years. I'm not saying it's coming to fruition, but like it's causing more and more people to be like, "Oh, he's actually pretty good at football, and we need to pay more attention to him."
Yeah, remember when the Bears traded a second round pick to the Steelers so they can get
I
Chase
remember.
Claypool? And then in that draft, they used that exact pick for Joey Porter, but then they used their other second round pick on George Pickens. And I just can't help but think that the Bears could have just had George Pickens on a rookie contract instead of a 1 year rental of Chase Claypool. It's devastating every time I watch George Pickens make a nice play.
I members. I'm sorry that you members as well. All right, let's go to our next trade target here, Dave. This one's interesting. It's not a single player. It's essentially the elite fantasy QBs. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, guys like this. These are the quarterbacks that you want to go after in your fantasy leagues.
Yep. Just talked about it a little bit earlier in the show about how preseason ADP is pretty reflective of how we expect these guys to finish. And we are especially good at the quarterback and wide receiver position. Running backs, they get weird. It's tough trying to project and predict who the top 20 running backs are going to be in the preseason, but we're a little bit better when it comes to quarterbacks. And I was just looking through. So this isn't one player. This isn't me saying like you need to go out and get this player. This is just the elite tier of quarterbacks that we talked about earlier this week, yesterday's show with Jeff Bell, when we talked about Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson kind of being in a tier of their own. I want to go out and I'm willing to pay up for these guys because if you look at last year through week 2, Kirk Cousins was the QB1, Russell Wilson was the QB5, Mac Jones was the QB7, Josh Allen was the QB13, Lamar Jackson was the QB21. 2 weeks of data isn't enough to draw any meaningful conclusions. Yes, the Saints offense looks better than they have in years past. And I think that surprises a lot of people. Yeah, Baker Mayfield is playing great right now in Tampa Bay. But the thing is, if everything goes right for them, they might be able to squeak in as a top 10 quarterback this year. We don't we aren't hoping that Lamar and Kyler and Josh Allen and Hurts are going to. We've seen them provide elite fantasy finishes before. These guys all have the opportunity to finish as the overall QB1. It's likely that they all finish inside the top 5. So what I'm trying to do right now, if I struck gold with a Baker Mayfield or Derek Carr or Sam Darnold, what I'm trying to do is look at the guys in my league that have one of these 4 quarterbacks and seeing if they have a positional need, whether it's running back, wide receiver, something like that. So I will go to a guy, let's say they lost Christian McCaffrey or they lost AJ Brown or Cooper Kupp, whatever it is. I'm trying to find that roster weakness on somebody else's team and offer them a Baker Mayfield and a wide receiver to tier up and get a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson. Or I'm going to the guy who lost Christian McCaffrey and I'm offering them Derek Carr and a running back to try to tier up and get Kyler Murray or Jalen Hurts. You got to get creative with these sorts of trades, but what we know is that things are going to even out over the course of a full 17 weeks. Right now, through 2 weeks, if you can sell one of your overperforming quarterbacks for a guy that we expect to finish in the top 5, I'm trying to do that. So I don't have one player. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with data talking about, the rushing output and the fantasy production or the completion percentage over expectation or any of these sorts of things. I'm just saying, who the good quarterbacks are. They're Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. Those are guys that we all expect to finish inside the top 5, could be the overall QB1, and if I can tier up with a late round guy who is producing right now, absolutely try to do that.
Is that only with late round guys, like, let's say, a Geno Smith, a Derek Carr, a Baker Mayfield,
Oh, no.
would you try to even tier up from, let's say, this might sound like a CJ Stroud to
CJ
Lamar Jackson?
Stroud, Joe Burrow. I mean, trying to do whatever I can to get one of these 4 guys. If you're able to do it with one of those late round guys, fantastic. That's great. I think the 2 guys that I'd shy away from trading would be Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels
Okay.
because they also have elite finishes inside their range of outcomes. But CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, like any of these guys that are outside of the top 4, I'm absolutely trying to trade up for.
Mahomes? Would you be trading would you be leveling up from Mahomes, who, by the way, 15 points per game this year right now. Josh Allen, who is the worst out of the bunch you're talking about, is a full 5 points ahead of him right now. It's only 2 weeks, but it's
And
something
Mahomes, I
to.
believe last year finishes like the QB9, great football
Mhm.
player, but the fantasy production hasn't especially been there. So yeah, if I could trade Mahomes and let's say like a Ty Chandler to get Josh Allen, I'm absolutely doing that.
That's interesting. That's an interesting one that you mentioned, just those 2 players. Anyways, let's go to the next one on here. I wanna talk about another wide receiver because it just feels like these are the kind of the easiest ones to predict, Dave. These players that are getting the targets or even just not getting targets, but we're used to them doing this year after year after year. And Brandon Ayuk is a guy right now who things could not be worse. The vibes in San Francisco could not be worse right now. The team, I mean, it could be worse, but the team just keeps losing players left and right. They just lost to the Minnesota Vikings, and Brandon Ayuk has really struggled through the first 2 weeks. And a lot of that is just it's the conditioning. It's that he wasn't there in camp. He's admitted that himself. Right now, he's the wide receiver 59 in fantasy football. But also, over these last 2 games, he's had 2 extremely close plays where he's almost had touchdowns in both of them. In week 1, there was a drop. In week 2, there was just a play of a ball that was a little bit out of bounds. He couldn't quite get into the end zone there. And so those 2 plays just go slightly different. And like I said with George Pickens, like we could just do the whole if, maybe, and but with all these players. But if those 2 plays go differently, we're talking about a totally different start to the season for Brandon Ayuk. And we'd just be relishing the fact that he's getting such a big opportunity now with Deebo Samuel being sidelined, with Christian McCaffrey being sidelined. We almost had a scare last week with George Kittle where he went off the field, turned out to just be cramps, and he came back. There's no Ricky Pearsall that's available at the moment, at least for another few weeks. Brandon Ayuk, right now, we're seeing him with a 15% target share, which is really not great. We talked about how bad that was for Jamar Chase. This is worse. This is 117th amongst qualified pass catchers. So I don't expect this to continue with Brandon Ayuk, where not only does the Niners offense continue to struggle, but where he is just simply not catching passes, not making big plays. This is not the guy that we've gotten used to over the years. He's had back-to-back seasons with 70 plus receptions, 1,000 yards, at least 7 touchdowns. He was wide receiver 22 and wide receiver 12 in points per game over the last 2 years. This is not the guy that we're used to. Okay. Now they've got the Rams in week 3, who just gave up massive performances. Wide receiver 5 performance to Jameson Williams and wide receiver 1 overall performance to Marvin Harrison Jr. in back-to-back weeks. This is the get right game. We talked about this earlier for Jamar Chase. We talked about this with a couple of players. This week is the get right week for Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, I do agree with you, but man, Brandon Ayuk has had one of the most like confusing careers thus far. Year 1 didn't do much of anything until like the final month of the season, and then in year 2 he was in like Kyle Shanahan's doghouse and didn't do much of anything. And then we saw it come together in year 3. We saw him break out in year 4, and now he's kind of back to looking like the player he was in 2021, where effort seems to be lacking a little bit. There seem to be some concentration issues with drops and whatnot. So I think that because of that, I think a lot of people are going to be panicking a little bit on Brandon Ayuk
Do you,
because
do you think that that's what's happening? Do you think he's back to just not giving effort because he doesn't care? He got paid?
I don't want to try to get in an NFL player's head, but the reason I'm saying that is because I think a lot of people are going to be feeling that way because what we're seeing right now looks very similar to what we saw in 2021, where Brandon Ayuk ended up being one of the worst picks in fantasy football. but they don't have the luxury right now to be able to put him in the doghouse. Like, Christian McCaffrey's not there. Debo Samuel's not there. They need to get the ball to Brandon Ayuk. So unless you're of the belief that Kyle Shanahan is going to say, we're going to scheme touches for Juwan Jennings over Brandon Ayuk, it makes sense to buy Brandon Ayuk. I think what we're seeing right now might not be as much of an effort thing as much as it is a missing out in training camp, not getting those reps in, not playing in the preseason. And I think that's a lot of the struggles that we see with Jamar Chase as well. So I think we probably should have talked about this more in the offseason in regards to Brandon Ayuk and in regards to Jamar Chase, that missing all of training camp and missing all of the preseason could have gotten them off to slow starts. And it's something that we didn't really talk about all that much. And now here we are in week 3, and so many people are panicking, wondering why their first and second round picks aren't performing. Well, yeah, these guys are, just putting their cleats on for the first time 3 weeks ago. So I'll exercise some patience with Brandon Ayuk. I expect to see him bounce back. Maybe it's this week, maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks from now, but we know Brandon Ayuk is a good player, and I think it's only a matter of time before he starts producing again.
The TLDR version of that is Dave is saying Alfredo is right. Go send your low ball trade offers for Brandon Ayuk in your league. All right, we got a trade question here. And as always, want to remind you guys, you can send your emails to fantasyshow@footballguys.com. It's fantasyshow@footballguys.com. Send us your trade questions. We'll answer them each week as we do our trade episode. Dave, Joseph is asking, should I be looking to trade Tyreek Hill with the recent injury to Tua Tagovailoa? And maybe if you are looking to trade him, what would you be looking to trade him for?
Now, you probably heard me, like I just talked about Jaylen Waddle as a guy that I want to buy low
I
on,
wasn't
and
paying attention.
I'm probably trying to do the same with Tyreek Hill. I take a very different approach to trades. I think that so many people, like when everybody's saying this guy's a buy low, I don't want to buy low on that player because everyone's saying he's a buy low, and when everyone's saying sell high, I don't want to sell high because everybody's saying it. I try, as cliche as it may sound, to zig when others are zagging. So I think right now every Tyreek Hill manager is going to be panicking because they see the splits where Tyreek Hill has 22 points per game when he's in Miami with Tua Tagovailoa and averages 15 points per game in Miami when Tua Tagovailoa isn't the quarterback. So because of that, I think that it's pushed his value so far down that, like, in theory, yeah, you want to trade away Tyreek Hill because now he has a quarterback downgrade and he probably isn't going to be the elite wide receiver one that he's been over the last 2 years. But if that's the way that everybody is thinking, there's no benefit to trading him because you're going to be trading low. You're not going to be recouping the same value you get. And we don't know what's going on with Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, Alfredo, maybe you can shine some light here. A lot of reports are that he's just going to come back after 4 weeks, that he just kind of needs some rest and then he'll come back. And then, of course, there's the alarmists saying that this is just kind of a soft launch on his retirement, that they're going to put him on IR for 4 weeks. And sometime over the next 4 weeks, we're going to get a retirement announcement. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Tua Tagovailoa, but I don't think it is good process to trade away, the best wide receiver in the league when his value is at a very low point. So my advice would be to hold Tyreek Hill, and for people who aren't rostering Tyreek Hill, I think my advice would be to go out and see if you could potentially buy low on him because I want talented players on my team, even if it is going to be a rough 3 or 4 week stretch here.
Yeah, this is such a hard question to answer because you don't know what you're getting in return. If we were saying, Tyreek
Like
Hill
Justin
for
Jefferson, sure. Yeah.
right. If someone sorry, if someone was saying I got offered Jamar Chase for my Tyreek Hill, yeah, I'm taking Jamar Chase in that instance there. But like you said, Dave, like there's gonna be so many people that are thinking I don't want Tyreek Hill because I don't know what this offense is doing. And you asked about like what's going on with Tua. As of right now, it just seems like he is going to be meeting with specialists. Sorry, let me get some water here. I'm choking up
Yeah, I'll,
thinking.
I'll talk while you're. Yeah, I think what it comes down to, like, is who you're getting in return, and I think that makes so much sense. Like if you're getting another elite wide receiver, Jamar Chase, an Amon St. Brown, a Justin Jefferson, I think there I'm okay, quote unquote, selling low. But you're selling low is in like you're trading the third overall pick for the fifth overall pick. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if somebody's in your inbox saying like, "Hey, man, I got Sam Darnold, Rashid Shaheed, and J.K. Dobbins for your Tyreek Hill. What do you think about that?" That's when you hit decline. I don't think we're at that point with Tyreek Hill yet, where you're selling your top 3 pick from your draft for a handful of late round overperformers.
All right, let's play a little quick game here. But
Okay.
before we do that, let me just finish the Tua Tagovailoa thing. Right now, apparently he is meeting with specialists. Nothing has quite been decided, but the specialists are basically going to give him the best course of action and the team the best course of action. And if I saw it correctly right now, he's been placed on IR. So there's going to be at least 4 weeks of no Tua Tagovailoa, where while everything gets figured out. Um, I personally, I think I'd lean more towards him not coming back. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's tough to imagine that a bunch of specialists are going to look at this and say, "Hey, this is the third concussion in 2 years,"
Yeah.
where we're seeing that posturing with his fingers, and it just seems way too dangerous. But that's neither here nor there. This show is not to talk about the morality of football and head injuries and stuff like that. We're just going to give you advice on fantasy. So let's play a game here. Tyreek Hill as a potential trade target. Someone offers you Jamison Williams right now for Tyreek Hill. Are you doing that?
I'm keeping Tyreek.
Marvin Harrison Jr.,
I'm keeping Tyreek.
Rashee Rice.
I mean, Rashee Rice is intriguing, and I think that might be where I kind of draw the line, where I might
I
prefer
loved watching your
Rashee
face
Rice.
during that.
Yeah, I mean, Rashee Rice was a guy that I was pounding the table for this offseason. Ranked him very, very highly, and looking at my week 3 rankings right now, I've got Rashee Rice wide receiver 5. I got him ahead of Tyreek Hill. So yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill was a guy who I was putting every single week for the last couple of years, has been a top 3 wide receiver. But now I've knocked him down a little bit. So, week 3 rankings obviously take matchups into consideration. But just to get an idea of like kind of where my head is at right now, I've got Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 7 for the week. So he still has the opportunity to take any ball to the house. It doesn't matter. I could go out there and suit up for the Dolphins and he could still score an 80-yard touchdown somehow. They're going to get him the ball in jet sweeps, whatever they can. So I've got Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Amon St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Rashee Rice, and Nico Collins ranked ahead of Tyreek Hill going into week 3.
Yeah, I get that. So just kind of put a bow on that. You're still seeing Tyreek as a top 8, top 10 wide receiver each week until further notice. And that's probably how he should be treated in trade talks.
Yeah, and
Essentially.
I think the guys that, where it gets, those are the guys, the 6 that I just mentioned are the guys that I would trade away Tyreek Hill for to get in return. Chase, Lamb, St. Brown, Jefferson, Rice, Collins. Once you get below that and you start looking at Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Malik Neighbors, Jamison Williams, Devonta Smith, I think at that point, I'd prefer Tyreek Hill.
All right. After we've gone through all of our trade targets, the trade questions, there are now some really valuable players that are probably hanging out on your waiver wire because we had all the waivers run and people are dropping players. It's crazy because people are already dropping players they spent so much fab on in week 1. Like Alan Lazard's back on the waiver wire. Shocker. Uh there's a few players on here on the sleeper app that have been dropped, and we're seeing their rostership percentage just continue to plummet. And one of the names that was actually really surprising to see is one of the most dropped players that are worth stash, or I mean, not just worth a stash, worth a potential starting spot, seeing how the team goes, is Deontay Johnson,
That's
who is
crazy.
everyone's just given up. They've given up not just on Deontay, but on the Panthers offense. And he's down to a 76% ownership or rostership on Sleeper, and he's one of the most dropped players. That just doesn't seem right, especially with Andy Dalton coming in,
Yeah.
Deontay Johnson
People are jumping
and
ship too
or
early.
yeah, I mean Deontay and or Adam Thielen could just see a ton of targets now. Andy Dalton's been a solid quarterback when he's played, and it's been helpful for fantasy.
Yeah. So Deontay Johnson, I mean, if you're in a league where Deontay Johnson was dropped, you got to pick him up immediately. Like that's just crazy to me that people are giving up on him. We talked last week about some of these surprising drops and Blake Corum and some other guys that like, yeah, you could pick this guy up and stash on your lineup. If Deontay Johnson was dropped, I'm picking him up and putting him in my flex spot in week 3. I mean, like Andy Dalton has a proven history of being able to support fantasy relevant wide receivers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alfredo, but didn't he throw for over 300 yards in his one start last year? I know they got the
Yeah,
win, but I think Andy Dalton passed for 300 yards. I mean, this is a guy every step along his career, whether it was his prolific career in Cincinnati, whether it was his short stint in Chicago or Dallas or his one start last year, or whether it was when he was playing with the Saints. Like Andy Dalton's a good quarterback. He might not be an elite quarterback, but I think that you can put him, as a top 20
God.
quarterback, and that's better than Bryce Young.
Can I tell you his stat line from last year?
Yeah, if I recall, it
Andy
was like
Dalton.
350 something yards and like 3
Yeah,
touchdowns, right?
it was bananas. Andy Dalton, 34 of 58, 58 pass attempts for 361 yards,
Yeah,
2 touchdowns.
and they see that and yeah, that was fun, but let's go back to Bryce Young's 130 yards per game.
My god. Yeah,
We don't
that's
expect him to average that over the course of a full season, but that just shows the
no.
upside. Like that is Bryce Young has never come close to sniffing those numbers in a single game. So if Eddie Dalton has upside that Bryce Young simply doesn't have, I mean, yeah, jumping ship on Deontay Johnson right now is just way too early, and that's foolish to drop him.
By the way, in that game, Adam Thielen, 11 receptions on 14 targets for 145 yards and a touchdown.
Yep.
Not suggesting that that's exactly what's going to happen here, and that was with the team like not being able to do anything else. They couldn't run the ball. They didn't really score many points, but man, like they were getting the ball to the wide receiver. So if there's a guy that can do it, Andy Dalton can do it. Dave, I'm going to list the rest of the players here that were some of the most dropped players on Sleeper, and you could just give me like one of your favorites here that really stands out. If there's more, by all means, go for it. So, Colby Parkinson, tight end for the Los Angeles Rams. Tank Bigsby is back on waivers after 1 week, after everyone I don't know what they expected. Running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Alexander Madison, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. Taysom Hill, tight end for the New Orleans Saints, or whatever he is for the New Orleans Saints. Justice Hill, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. Greg Dortch, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Marshawn Lloyd, running back for the Packers. And Blake Corum continues to drop, running back for the Rams. Dave, is there someone that really stands out to you from this list?
I mean, Taysom Hill left the game with an injury, and now people are dropping him because he got injured. I don't know.
So, and,
Tays
and by the way, the reports have come back that he's fine,
Yeah,
that it was
yeah, he's
precaution.
gonna be playing this week, yeah, so I'm definitely Taysom Hill is the guy that would pique my interest, most probably, but Tank Bigsby is another guy if he's available. This guy looked really good in week 1, didn't have quite the same role in week 2, but we know he's an injury away from being an RB1 and has shown that he can run the ball pretty well in the NFL, from what we saw in week 1, and then Justice Hill is the other guy. He's got some contingent upside as well, but I think Justice Hill is a guy that when we see a, close spread for the Ravens, that you can put Justice Hill in as a flex play. I think that we can kind of, it's a dangerous game to play, but you can kind of predict game scripts based on how Vegas is setting these games up, and I think the games where you see that the Ravens are a 7 point or more favorite, then you're confident in Derrick Henry and you plug him in knowing that he's going to get some second half run where he can accumulate some points. And I think when it's projected to be a closer game where they're playing a better opponent, that's when they might have to get into that hurry up offense where they lean on Justice Hill a little bit more. So Justice Hill is kind of, we talked about this with David Montgomery, one of those rare guys that has some standalone value and elite contingent upside. And Justice Hill is exactly that.
Yeah, I like those guys that you mentioned there. I'm also just going to throw in Marshawn Lloyd as the guy. Like, we've seen that whether Jordan Love is there or not, the Packers are willing to commit to the run. And if Josh Jacobs were to miss any time, Marshawn Lloyd becomes an immediate top 15 running back that week. And right now, he's already looked good when he's been on the field. I know that there's been a little bit of an issue early in the offseason with him battling injuries.
Alfredo,
I
he
don't
he is
believe
on IR right now.
he is on IR. Well, there
Yeah, they
you
put him
go.
on IR
That's
yesterday.
I missed that. I remember reading something that he was battling the injuries again. So yeah, all right. So then I'll
But
take
that
that
I
back.
saw
Marshawn
somebody in
Lloyd.
one of my leagues this morning had an open IR spot. So what they did is they just cut somebody from the back of their bench, picked up Marshawn Lloyd, put him on the IR spot, and then pick somebody else up off of waivers. So I think that if you have an open IR spot, that's exactly what you should do is stash Marshawn Lloyd, but just know that it's going to be a few weeks before we see him. But by the time he comes back, Jordan Love should be back as well. And this will be a much better offense.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Final Hail Mary of the show. We just got a question on Twitter. Someone said, Dave, Alfredo, appreciate your show and your knowledge. I'm not sure what I should do with these players in a 10-team PPR league. He's got Drake London, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin. I think Mike Evans is the obvious starter out of that bunch. Drake London is probably his wide receiver too at this point. Um, I think you're holding on to Deontay. Like, I don't really know what else you're doing here. I'm sure you're keeping Deontay and Terry McLaurin on your bench, right, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think Deontay is going to move into flex consideration pretty quickly with Andy Dalton there, so I'm not too concerned about that. And then with Terry McLaurin, we've seen a lot of like really close two big plays, and they haven't come to fruition yet. And the production so far has been extremely disappointing. But I think with Terry McLaurin and Deontay Johnson, these are both just wait and see guys. I'm not panicking or selling low on either of them. If you got to put them in your flex spot, it's not the worst option in the world. But if you've got a better option and can afford to just keep McLaurin and Deontay on your bench for a while, that's obviously what you want to do.
Well, there you go. Kyle, you got in a buzzer beater right there at the end of the recording. Dave and I are going to be back again tomorrow with our week 3 starts, sits, and streamers. And we're going to be answering your start and sit questions. Please be sure to send us an email, fantasyshow@footballguys.com. And you can also maybe just drop those questions in the comments down below here, and we will add that to the show sheet for tomorrow. And then make sure, obviously, you tune in, or else how are you going to get the advice? Duh. So, yeah, be there tomorrow for the starts, sits, and streamers. I really have to enunciate when I say that title, Dave.
Starts, sits, and streamers.
Yep. Get a little parcel tongue there at the end.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, this is another good show, Dave. We did it. Everybody, thank you for watching and listening all the way through. For myself, for Dave Kluge, we'll see you next time. Adios.